The reason Diddy was not found guilty on counts 2 and 4, which is sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion of Cassie and Jane, is because the world doesn't believe women.
What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. The Diddy court proceedings came to an end last Wednesday, and I want to talk about the verdict and the public's response. So if you weren't aware, the jury found Diddy guilty of 2 of the 5 charges, both of which being transportation to engage in prostitution in the case of Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe. I have so much to say, but let's see what the streets are saying first.
The reason Diddy was not found guilty on counts 2 and 4, which is sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion of Cassie and Jane, is because the world doesn't believe women. And they don't believe that women have the right to say no after they've already said yes. The 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, also known as the Mann Act, didn't just include Cassie and Jane, they also included the male escorts. You following me? Now, I'll be the first to admit, Jane's testimony throughout this whole trial was not that solid, okay? It was a little bit shaky, and I'm not saying I don't believe her, but I can see how the defense team poked holes in her testimony. But you can't convince me that people watched the video of Cassie trying to escape from that man, running literally to the elevator. He drags her, beats her, and then tries to drag her back into the room. And they didn't think that she was being forced to participate in things that she did not want to participate in. There's no way that you can tell me that people read text messages of Cassie directly saying she didn't want to continue to participate in freak-offs and testifying to the fact that she had UTIs and infections and was still forced to engage in freak-offs, and you did not think that that was trafficking. Jane testified that the freak-offs were happening so often that she got nipple infections. Yes, you heard me correctly. Nipple infections. They also read text messages of Jane telling Diddy that she felt like she was a prostitute. Like, what are we talking about? The world is not as progressive as people try to make it seem. And I already know that people who have not been following the trial closely are going to say that Diddy did nothing wrong and that he should be allowed to be freaky, but that's because they don't care about the truth. And listen, I'm not the judge or the jury, but I'm making a speculation.
Let's talk about what happens when a judge doesn't agree with the jury.
Now, we see that Diddy was acquitted of the most serious charges. He was found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And the judge seemed visibly frustrated because, as we've said throughout the past weeks, the elements of RICO were in fact proven. But as I also told you, the jury are the finders of fact. The judge is the finder of law. So even if you present a brilliant case, even if you present all of the elements, and again, this case, I don't know that I would say brilliant, impactful, traumatic, highly detailed, sure. But even if you present a brilliant case, it's still up to the jury. It's still up to them to determine whether or not they're going to render a verdict in favor of your client or in favor of the prosecution. And there are so many elements that go into that. You really just don't know. So what do you do when the judge doesn't agree? Well, as you could see yesterday, Diddy's bail hearing his bail was denied. Essentially, the defense asked that he be released on $1 million bond, and that's something that they would easily be able to procure between what he has in liquid assets as well as what he has in properties, etc. And the judge denied it. Cassie did submit a letter to the court asking that he not be released. She reiterated that she felt like he was a dangerous individual and that she, along with other witnesses, may be in danger if he was released. I think that's a completely fair sentiment. And the judge took it into consideration. So Diddy is still in prison. However, now comes sentencing. So the max amount of time that he can serve is 20 years. So again, it is deeply disappointing when you see people share their traumas and you see a jury say, we don't think it happened. But we're in really interesting times right now, and that's just the reality of the situation. So when it comes to sentencing, again, the max amount of time that he can serve is 20 years. This also doesn't include the other suits being brought against him. So there are still state cases. This was the federal case, but again, there are state charges that can and are being brought against him. But for the purposes of this, do I think the judge is going to give him all 20 years? I don't know. And this is where there's a lot of discretion with the judge, because the judge could be frustrated that they're not convicting him on RICO and say, well, you know what? I'm going to give you 18. That would be for a significant portion, right? Diddy's 51, 52. So him spending close to 20 years in prison, by the time he gets out, his quality of life is probably not going to be great. There's also the question of what happens with his children. There's also the question of whether or not, with them not being charged with RICO, it's likely his assets will continue to be in his family's possession, but there are more charges to be brought against him. And there's a scenario where a lot of these assets could continue to dwindle. So I don't know. I'll keep you posted. I don't know that I think he's getting 20 years. What people deserve and what they get in the court of law is sometimes very different. But yeah, I want to hear from you. What do you think? How did you feel about the verdict? And how much time do you think he's going to get, if any? Hope you had the day you deserve. Bye.
Here's my 2 cents. I don't think the American people are smart enough to sit on juries. And I have said for a very long time that a juror should be somebody who actually takes classes so that at the very base level, they understand legal jargon and prove that they have some concept of the law. And this is coming from years of observation because my father was a criminal trial attorney who specialized in criminal and constitutional law, who also wrote this book, Raw Law, that was published by Simon & Schuster. So as someone who would sit in courtrooms while my father tried cases, and sitting with him as he developed specific stories and anecdotes to tell in his book, to witness and even hear some of the wildest stories from jurors to my father, like him running into a juror sometime after a case that he tried, and the juror telling my father that some people in the jury room believed that my father's client was guilty simply because of the way that my father dressed, and they believed that he had to be guilty in order to be able to afford an attorney like my father. No facts about the case, nothing about what his client was actually charged with, but how my father, the attorney, came dressed to court. We don't even understand half the shit that attorneys be saying during the trial anyway. Nope.
And I want to be clear, the fact that Diddy only got charged guilty in 2 of his charges just goes into the fact, or should make y'all really realize why women don't say things, or why they take a long time to come out, or why they just will pretend it never happened. I want to say it's safer to stay quiet, but I want to say that it makes sense to stay quiet, seeing that this was such a public trial and we all seen how he mistreated these women. People still got on the internet and told us that the women were not victims, for one. Said that because Cassie was over 18, she was not grown. Said that even though her livelihood was completely dependent on whether or not she did exactly what Diddy wanted her to do, Cassie and the others, their whole livelihood was completely dependent on what Diddy wanted to do. But because they helped set these things up, or they were told to, they were given instruction to, they were not victims. They said that even though these women verbally said that they do not want to do it, and they only did it for his approval and for his love, that they were not victims. I want y'all to understand how much this is going to change how people view abuse within sexual relationships, romantic relationships, or just trafficking relationships. And maybe not trafficking relationships, but trafficking exchanges. This is going to disrupt a lot of things, and not necessarily for Diddy, but for women and for our overall growth, and just people listening to us, because people already didn't listen to women. They already kind of pushed what women had to say to the side. So him being found not guilty on all but 2 charges, it's a dangerous thing to see.
Alright, so in my opinion, the jury definitely failed Diddy's victim. We listened to weeks of testimony of how this man has been using his power and influence to terrorize everyone around him, and it appears to have fallen on deaf ears. I think the verdict he received is due to a lack of understanding of the cycle of abuse and the law, as well as, misogyny. And I say this because of the statements made by a juror that came forward, as well as the public discourse I've been seeing throughout the case. Poor Cassie had to take the stand at 8 or 9 months pregnant and recount everything she went through with him, and people had the nerve to say she was a willing participant. Yeah, because the video we saw of Diddy beating her up and down the Intercontinental Hotel hallway definitely gives the impression she was free to leave whenever she wanted, right? Ridiculous. Let's get into what the juror that came forward had to say about this. Reading all my notes and looking back at the evidence, I probably would have reached the same conclusion as the other jurors. George told CNN anchor-in-chief legal analyst Laura Coates of the racketeering charge. I think there was always a little bit of doubt in people's minds. I think it was a tough case to prove, especially the first charge of racketeering. There was always a little bit of doubt there, even from the beginning. George, who said he was aware of Combs before the trial but didn't know his music, also said Combs' defense team managed to make Don Richards appear very not credible. I even wrote in my notebook it was like a takedown. The man described being impressed by the defense's work in court and noted Combs was very attentive in the courtroom. Quote, he was fighting for himself, end quote, George said. George told The Times he wasn't convinced by the prosecution's assertions that Cassie Ventura Fine and the anonymous ex-girlfriend, Jane, were sex trafficked, counts 2 and 4, of which Combs was found not guilty. Quote, I don't think it was forced, end quote, George said of the woman's sexual encounters with escorts, which he not only watched footage of, but also heard about during testimony. He added they seemed to be quote-unquote willing participants, telling CNN the defense showed text messages from Ventura Fine in which she didn't seem quote-unquote forced to participate in sexual activities. However, George told CNN that, quote, I think we did, end quote, believe Ventura. He added she gave, quote-unquote, very credible testimony and said, quote, she wouldn't have done all this just to come up there and lie about everything. It truly sickens me how little people take abuse and its psychology seriously and how little people understand consent. I actually read Cassie's initial lawsuit and there was no way anyone can hear what she went through and say she wanted it. This man lured her into a relationship under the guise of making her a star just to physically and sexually abuse her for the next decade. He got her to agree to a 10-album deal, which that alone was a red flag, but a 19-year-old wouldn't know that, and slowly began isolating her and shutting down any networking opportunities she had outside of him. She didn't stand a chance. And even if she texted she was looking forward to the freak offs in the text messages, it doesn't mean that's how she felt every time. She's allowed to change her mind, and the fact that she had to suffer through raging UTIs and infections lets us know it was against her will, period. This was not a case of an old guy being too freaked out as the masses would have you to believe. This was about a case of sexual deviancy and predation. And per usual, we were reminded that these matters aren't taken seriously in the court of law. My heart truly goes out to Cassie and Jane Doe. It's no coincidence to me that this majority male jury only found Diddy guilty of the charges involving male SWs and not the more serious charges. I mean, even the jury we heard from had the nerve to fix his lips and say, I felt like a takedown. That's exactly what a RICO case is. It's a federal takedown for legal misconduct. Even though the prosecution laid out the evidence of him misappropriating Combs Enterprises funds, a pattern of using coercive control over the people around him, the jury still dropped the ball. So that brings us to where we are today. Diddy has been found guilty of 2 of the 5 charges, which carry a max sentence of 10 years each. He's due to be sentenced in October. I feel like the judge denying his team's multiple requests for a mistrial and the request for house arrest while awaiting sentencing may be a sign that he may go away for considerable time. Just with the way the judge kept trying to stress how the law actually works to make sure the jury had no questions and reached the right conclusion gives me the feeling that he thinks Diddy is actually guilty. I personally believe Diddy belongs under the damn jail, and I think that Biggie and Kim Porter's cases need to be reopened, because he 100% was involved. Did we even hear from Al B. Sure? He's another victim of Diddy. And don't even get me started on celebrities that waited until the case reached its conclusion to show support for this monster. Saoirse Santana, Carisha, Candy Burris, Tiny Harris. Despicable. With that said, let me know what you all think of the trial. Do you think the jury got it right? Drop your comments down below. Like and sub if you enjoyed this content, y'all. We're on the road to 100 subs, and I would love to have you get with the winning team, all right? I'll be back with another What Took TikTok real soon. Bye.